Hi, and welcome back to another video. Here's part 4 for non-clinical legal and ethical principles, roles, and leadership. In this video, I'll go over informed consent. I'll also go over what you should be disclosing to the patient. I'll go over case management, Stark law, habeas corpus, and last but not least, I'll go over the court cases that are important for you to know for the exam. So let's get into it. So let's talk about informed consent. Informed consent is a communication between the patient and the provider, and this is going to result in the patient accepting or rejecting the proposed treatment. So this is where the provider is explaining any relevant information that enables the client to make an informed decision. So this altogether is going to give the patient autonomy and to help make a clear decision. All adults and emancipated minors have a right to informed consent. Now, emancipated minors are considered people who are younger than the age of 18, who are married, are parents, or they're self sufficiently living away from the family. So let's say you're the nurse practitioner who is seeing the patient for both psychiatric illness as well as their chemical dependency illness. Now, the patient wants you to send the medical records over to their family nurse practitioner. You, as a nurse practitioner, what would you have the patient do at this point? Have the patient sign one release of information or have the patient sign two separate release of information? If you said have the patient sign two separate release of information, then that is correct. Federal law protects the confidentiality of substance use disorder treatment records as well. Now, you might ask yourself, why is this important for people living with substance use disorder? Well, confidentiality we know is a cornerstone for any treatment relationship, right? So, for people receiving substance use disorder treatments, they are on strict confidentiality protection. That means that you can share information about past and current drug use without worrying that it will be used against you by the police or a landlord, an employer, a judge, or even a social worker. So this is basically the federal law that's protecting the substance use disorder patients from consenting. If they want to consent to release that information, they can. If they don't want to, they can choose not to release any information regarding their substance use history. So until we have eliminated the stigma or criminalization of substance use disorders, these patients are going to need the right to access treatment without worrying that their records will not be used to take away their children or their housing, their employment, or any freedom that they would have because of their substance use disorder. So let's say you're the nurse practitioner who is working with the patient who was recently injured at job. Now, this patient is being treated for both medication and psychotherapy portion of the care. Now, if this patient's employer is asking you to send a release of information requesting the patient's complete medical record, so what would you do as the nurse practitioner who's providing the care for this patient? Would you send the complete medical record but withhold the psychotherapy notes? Or would you send the complete record and also include the psychotherapy notes? So if you said send the complete medical record but withhold the psychotherapy notes, you are correct. So in some cases, the privacy of the patient's psychotherapy notes is protected from the release of information, and this can be withheld. So psychotherapy notes we know are personal mental health professionals notes that are taken during a conversation with that patient. So they are going to be kept separate from the patient's medical record and billing records. And according to HIPAA, it does not allow the provider to make most disclosure about the psychotherapy notes without your authorization as a patient. Now, remember, all adults and emancipated minors have the right to make an informed consent. Now, that informed consent is going to be based on their decision of capacity. What does capacity mean? Capacity is competency. Patients should have the capacity or the ability to make their decision. If they're not able to make their decision, then there would be some sort of a court or maybe a healthcare proxy who would make a decision on their behalf. So when I say competency we know is illegal. It's not a medical concept. It's a concept that involves the client's ability to make a reasonable decision. They have the judgments and the decisions regarding their care and their treatment. So as far as disclosure, the disclosure is going to be when the provider should provide the information about the treatment. They're going to provide information about the tests and the procedures. If there's any questions, they answer that. The provider is also going over the benefits, any risk. So the provider does have to disclose all this information in order for the patient to give an informed consent. Now let's take a look at comprehension. Comprehension is important because that the patient understands the relevant information. Now, consent should be given voluntarily and without any coercion by the patient. So again, what should you be disclosing to the patient? You're going to disclose to the patient the nature and the purpose of the proposed treatment or the procedure. You're going to educate them regarding the risk and benefits of the treatment, as well as the risk and benefits of not undergoing the treatment. You're also going to talk about alternative treatments, as well as diagnosis and prognosis of the disease or the illness. Now, an informed consent must be documented in the medical record by the provider. So, you as an NP should be documenting that you received the informed consent from the patient. Family members, court appointed guardians, or others may act as surrogate decision makers and make decision, like I said, on behalf of patients who are unable to make any of the decisions. So, as a PMHNP, it is our responsibility to ensure that the client are capable of providing an informed consent. So, what is case management? Case management, we know, is an oversight. It's a system that is providing therapeutic services and benefits to patients. It involves coordinating services, ensuring quality outcomes, monitoring plans, and assisting clients. So, the overall goal for case management is to promote quality and have cost effective outcomes. Okay, so let's talk briefly about Stark Law. Now, according to the Stark Law, Medicare or federal government, it does not permit you as a provider to refer your patients to family members for treatments because this is considered fraudulent practices. So, for example, if you are the Psych NP and you refer your patient out to your brother or your sister who is a doctor in another facility, this would be considered a fraudulent practice. Have you heard of habeas corpus? What is it? Well, habeas corpus allows a person who is being illegally detained or improperly hospitalized, in this case for psychiatric patients especially, he or she can then go to the court and debate whether the hospitalization was legally required. So, attorney can file for writ of habeas corpus, and that will cause the person to be brought before the judge, and the judge will determine whether the person was being held illegally and order them a release. As a mental health care provider, you should know some of the court cases that took place in our country. So, here we have a list of court cases. Let's go through them one by one. So before I talk about the court cases, I do want to encourage you guys, if you do find the court cases interesting or have trouble remembering it, go ahead and read about it in depth to have a better understanding of what went on exactly in the court cases to help you remember what each cases represent and what each case is known for. And this will help you to have a better understanding. I really enjoyed reading all these court cases because it gave me a better understanding of what changes came about in our mental health field and how the rights of the patients changed because of these court cases. So the first court case I like to talk about is O'Connor versus Donaldson. This court case states that it is unconstitutional for a person to be committed involuntarily, especially who is not imminently dangerous to themselves or others. The second court case I like to discuss is Dusky versus United States. Now, this is a court case that talks about to be competent to stand trial. So in the case with Dusky versus United States, the court ruled that to be competent or to stand trial, the defendant must have sufficient ability to consult with the lawyer and have a reasonable degree or understanding and a rational as well as factual understanding of what is going against him. So the court made it clear that a brief mental status exam was insufficient. Durham versus United States is the third court case that I'd like to talk about, and this is the court case that talks about insanity defense, that uses insanity defense. What do I mean by that? This is the court case that used the defendant and claiming that this person is not guilty because of reason of insanity. So the court stated that an accused is not criminally responsible if his unlawful act was the product of mental disease or mental defect. The fourth court case that I would like to talk about is Rogers versus Oaken. Now, this is a court case that talks about the patient has a right to refuse the medication, but a guardian can consent to the treatment for them. So this is a court case that ruled that the committed patients could not be forcibly medicated except in the case of emergency. So, for example, when the patient's behavior poses a significant threat to themselves or others, you can medicate this patient. So the fifth court case I like to discuss is Rennie versus Klein. Now, this is the court case that determined that patients may have the right to refuse any treatment or any medication and use an appeal process. So this is the court case that gave the patient the right to refuse medication and gave the right to privacy. Versus Roger versus Oaken, we also learned that this also gave the patient the right to refuse medication as well as it gave the right to the guardianship. So the patient can also have a consent. A guardian can consent to the treatment. So that's Roger, and Renee is basically giving the right to privacy. The sixth court case that I'd like to discuss is Ford versus Wainwright. Now, this court case established a person's competence to be executed. One, a person must understand the retributive element of punishment. And two, in this court case, a person must be in the best place to make peace with his or her religion. So real quick, I'm just going to discuss what happened in this court case to help you have a better understanding of what I was talking about. So in this court case, Ford was sentenced to death in 1974 for first-degree murder. So while he was on the death row, Ford's mental status began to change, and he was evaluated by 3 psychiatrists who determined that he was suffering from psychosis. So when they found out that he's suffering from psychosis, regardless of that, the Florida governor decided that he should still be on the death warrant. Now, Ford decided that he's going to sue the federal courts, and his case went all the way up to Supreme Court. And then it was ruled that the Supreme Court said that the execution of insane constituted cruel and unusual punishment, and that was a violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. Lastly, the 7th court case that I would like to discuss is Tarasoff versus Reagents. This court case established that a mental health professional has a duty to warn potential victims of any impending danger from a patient. The state laws on duty to warn, this varies from state to state. So it is a professional responsibility to know what is required in the state that you are working in. So when a situation like a patient is confronting and telling you that they had some sort of confrontation with an employer, or they're waiting for somebody and they want to go hurt them after they get out of work or something, you want to make sure you consult the State Board of Nursing regarding the state law requirements of reporting potential harm. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.